Fantastic. So welcome to Unit 3. You're doing really well so far, and it's a lot to learn, but this is a big unit where we're going to be looking at full stack development with Node and Express. Don't worry if they don't mean anything to you just yet. We're going to give you a good high-level overview of what all of this is right now. So what actually is full stack development? So currently, we've been looking at front end, the user-facing websites. We've been building those kind of user interfaces. We've also got something called back-end development, and this is where all of the kind of server-based code lives. You know, that could be our databases, our data management, all of kind of the code that puts together our dynamic websites for us. You know, in the instance of, say, a weather application, all of the calculations from the weather sensors gets done on a server, not on the front end web page. So we've got this kind of these back end, very powerful servers and computers that do all of that work for us and then deliver it to a front end. Full stack development is basically doing both of those at the same time. Full stack developers can make the front end, the user interface of our application, and also do the coding for that back-end service as well that lives on the servers in a data center or in a server room, something like that. The majority of code nowadays is written for back-end services. And that's mainly because, like we've discussed, there's only really 3 languages that you can run on front ends. You know, you've got HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And yes, there's other frameworks. We've looked at React, but we've also got Vue and Angular and a myriad of other frameworks as well. However, on the back end, we've got loads of different frameworks and languages that we can use. So if you're developing stuff for Windows, you might be using ASP.NET and C#. You may have, PostgreSQL or Postgres databases on the back end. You know, you might be using PHP, Golang, Rust, Ruby, Python, all of these different things on the back end. Just to deliver these user interfaces to the front end. So I like to use this kind of analogy that, yes, we've got our websites, but that really is the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot of work goes into the back end that you as a user never really see. So what are we going to be building during this unit? So we're going to build an app called Bookify. That sounds like a really nice startup-y name, I think. Maybe it'll be a tech unicorn one day. Maybe, I doubt it, but we're going to give it a go anyway. So what this is a book reviewing platform. It's going to be super simple, and the purpose of it is to teach you all of the necessary components that go into basically every single application that's on the web today. It's crucial that users will be able to sign into an account. Users will have their own library of books. Users can add reviews to books, both their own books and books that other people have. And we're going to add another feature as well. We're going to make this, and this is what's going to kind of make us money, I suppose, is that authors can access our app via an API, and then they can embed these reviews on their own website. You know, maybe an author has written a book that they're not getting many reviews on their own website, so they can use our service where there's loads of reviews of their book and kind of get those via an API. So that's kind of the app that we're going to be building. There's going to be user accounts. There's going to be kind of resources of these books, and also a resource of reviews as well that people can kind of review and add to different books. A little bit like Amazon without the terrible working conditions, I suppose, is what we're going to be making. So the tech stack for this project, for Bookify, is going to be Node.js. And again, we've had a look a little bit at Node.js when we were using React, but we're going to go much deeper into it now. And of course, we'll be using JavaScript in order to kind of program that up. Our backend sort of database is going to be MongoDB, and we're going to use something to sit between, or sort of inside our app, but between our app and the database, called Mongoose. Don't worry if this doesn't mean too much to you just yet. I'm going to give you a high-level overview, and then we're going to get really deep dives into each of these pieces of technology. The backend framework that we're going to be using is going to be called Express.js, and there's loads of people use Express.js. You know, Accenture, Twitter, Netflix used to use Express as their main kind of web framework. I'm not sure they do anymore, but yeah, they used to use Express. Loads of big companies use Express. It's a really good one to learn, and because of how it's set up, it's a brilliant one to learn first because it teaches you all the stuff that loads of other frameworks use as well. We're going to use something called embedded JavaScript layouts to actually make a front end for us, kind of in the back end. And we're going to use something called Passport and JSON Web Tokens in order to provide kind of logging in and logging out functionality for us. Again, this might all sound like double Dutch or complete nonsense to you at the moment. Let's get into it. So Node.js, as we've already looked at briefly, it's basically a way for us to run JavaScript anywhere on the back end. There is another sort of popular JavaScript runtime for the back end called Deno, and that's very powerful. That's a little bit more kind of batteries included. You know, it does a little bit more for you, but Node.js is by far the most popular way of running JavaScript on a back end. Hence why we're teaching you this. Now, you should have already had this downloaded. And if you don't, go and have a look at the React, in the React module, the how to install Node.js lesson. So next up, we're going to be looking at MongoDB. Now, there's really kind of two types of database available. And again, this is a super high level overview. We're going to get into this really deeply quite shortly. We've got relational, or sometimes called SQL databases. And the way that you can think of these is a little bit like an Excel spreadsheet or a Google Docs, a Google Sheets or a Apple Numbers spreadsheet. You know, we've got columns and we've got lines of data. In MongoDB, it's what's called a document database. And there's a bunch of different kind of NoSQL databases available to us. We've got graph databases, we've got key value. There's another kind as well that I can't think off the top of my head. But MongoDB is what's called a document database. And in MongoDB, we have these kind of documents. So the stuff that's on the left here, the relational SQL database, the same data is in this NoSQL database, this document database, where we've got John Doe is in this kind of almost like JSON-esque layout. It's not called JSON, it's actually called BSON, but for now we can kind of think of it like this. What I want you to take away from this slide is basically that SQL databases or relational databases are like tables, and NoSQL databases in this instance are like key value pairs or like these documents, these JSON type documents. What we're going to use to help us use our database, our MongoDB database, is something called Mongoose. And this is an object relational mapper. Now, there's ORMs for most types of databases. We've got them for Postgres, we've got them for MySQL, we've got them for MariaDB, we've got them for all these different databases. And what this basically is it sits within our application. The code kind of is inside our Express app, but it's almost something that kind of sits between all of the code that we want to run, you know, for our users in our backend app and the database itself. It makes kind of using the database as a developer much easier and simpler. There are some people that say that you shouldn't use ORMs because they can add overhead and they can make things slower, which is definitely true. But the advantages and the disadvantages are definitely one to kind of discuss with your team rather than just kind of have an opinion that they're good or bad. Ultimately, when it comes down to it, you're probably going to be using an ORM of some kind. So that's why we're going to be looking at Mongoose. Express.js, so this is going to be our web application framework. And in a nutshell, what Express does is it takes all of the kind of requests, user requests, and it shoots them off to the right bit of code. It can send it to Mongoose to get things from the database. It can send it to bits of JavaScript if we want to do, say, calculations or different, send back different data, or do something with a string, or do something with images, or whatever that might be. We can also use Express to send things to kind of Axios, and then this will send a request to somewhere else on the internet to then get that data back, send it to Express, and then send it back to our users. It's very powerful. There's a lot of stuff in there, but ultimately this is kind of just what Express does. It takes requests from users and sends it to bits of code that we write, and then sends the response back to our users. So we're going to just briefly touch on EJS, or embedded JavaScript, Passport, and JSON Web Tokens. EJS is basically what we're going to be using to build these dynamic websites in our backend. Now, we've been doing that with React this far, but what we're going to do is we're actually going to build the static HTML with our dynamic content in it and then send this to the user. Don't worry again if this doesn't make too much sense right now. Just know that this is something that we're going to be using to kind of build our front-end websites. Passport and JWT, or JSON Web Tokens, are what we're going to be using to deal with the logging in and logging out of our users. A JSON Web Token is basically just a big long string of data that kind of encodes some other data. So we can have kind of the name of our user, or we could have the login ID or the sessions IDs of our users as well. And they're kind of a semi-secure way. They can be decoded really, really easily. But they're a sort of semi-secure way of checking that the right user is logged in and stuff like that. So what will this all look like? So we're going to be using a design pattern, if you like, called Model View Controller. And this is something that kind of Express lends itself to really, really well. So we have briefly looked at Model View Controller, or MVC design patterns and architectures in Unit 1 when we were making our games. We had kind of the data of the game, and then we did something with that data, and then we kind of showed that to the user. Well, that's basically what we're going to be doing here. So we've got our clients, our people, or our user laptops and computers. They will send requests to our Express controller. Now, the controllers actually live within Express. We have to write those ourselves. But for the context of this, we can kind of think of Express as our controller. Our controller then reads or updates our models, and our model is our data. Now, in Unit 1, we did that with just saving kind of the state of the game in either local storage or just in a variable. In this instance, we're going to be saving our data actually in a persistent database, so that when a user logs out and then logs back in, all of that data exists. The model may or may not, hence why I've put these arrows in blue, depending on what we set it to do as developers, might then notify our controller of an update or a read. It then sends this information back to our controller. And depending on what we program that controller to do, it will then update our view. Now, this could be something as simple as just build me a login page, give me a login page. It could be something really dynamic, such as the Facebook homepage, where it's got all of the posts that are saved in the database. It's got all of our user account info. It's got all of the groups that we belong to. This view is then delivered to the client, and depending on what the client then does, the whole process kind of starts again. So again, please don't worry if this seems like it all went over the top of your head. I promise you it didn't. Stuff did go in there. And what this has done is it will make you slightly more familiar with kind of the mental models that I'm trying to teach you later on in this unit. So let's get started. Let's build our Bookify app.